I am hosting a tournament today, and these are the coolest decks that top players brought to it. There are two deck building restrictions in this tournament. The first is a ban list consisting of Captain Carter, Mercury, Supergiant, Gambit, Horseman of Death, Iska the Unbeaten, and Arishem. The second is a deck building requirement that cards must have a card from the most recent 5 months of Marvel Snap, starting with En Sabanur's release. With that said, let's get into the decks. My main hope with this tournament was that the ban list would allow different contexts for people to succeed in. That cards that were previously relegated specifically to copying things like Gambit and Captain Carter would now be a little bit more free to do other stuff. But I do think that it's pretty reasonable that people looked at this ban list, came to the conclusion that they should be finding something stupid to do with Mother Ascani, and then slap that in whatever they thought the nicest mid-range shell for it to accommodate was. And I think that that is what's going on here from Gamer and Browde, a move-based package that is aiming for maximum power output using Iron Man and, of course, Sasquatch as Mother Ascani Wingbeat targets. This is fused with, instead of a V-Hand package, a move-based package that focuses on the incredible spiraling power of Sam Wilson, Kraven, Batroc, and Spider-Man Brand New Day. And yes, I do think Spider-Man Brand New Day is a locked-in piece of this package. Really, the package is maybe 7 cards. Batroc, Spider-Man, Kraven, Sam, Silk, Hydra, Stomper. That's kind of just what it looks like. I'm realizing as I'm recording that that's 6 cards and not 7 cards, because I'm apparently a very capable counting human being who's also able to speak English well and express what he's trying to say here, and I'm not trying to do a 6-7 joke, I promise. That package of 6 cards is very easily able to fuse with other stuff, because once you go outside of those 6 cards, there just really isn't a lot for you to be doing that adds power to those cards. This is a deck that has often fused those 6 cards with some tech cards, but in the case of what this deck is trying to do, it's taking the archetype a different direction. Instead of fusing with things like Mobius and Stardust and Cosmic Ghost Rider, it's saying, what if we were the thing making other people play tech cards? What if we fused with a deck that was just trying to do some power output here? Notably, there is a Luke Cage here, and there is a Scarlet Witch here. These are tech slots in this list, because really what's happening is you have your 6 core cards, and you have your additional power package of Iron Man, Mother Ascani, Sasquatch, and Wingbeat, and then you have 2 slots left. So what they've chosen to target are people playing Magic decks and people playing Afflict decks such as Phantom X. A lot of the response when I announced this tournament was that Phantom X was probably the best deck that wasn't banned, but that doesn't necessarily mean that a lot of people are going to be able to play it. So I think what's going to be interesting for me about this list is whether or not their tech choices were the result of correct metagame reads or just a little bit off base. Another thing I was hoping the ban list could do was open up the meta just a little bit, and I think that you can see the meta game being a little bit opened up by this list from Doc Guapo. Doc Guapo is a bounce one trick. If he's not bouncing, he's not playing, and one of the cards that is the absolute bane of his existence is Gambit, Horseman of Death, who has been removed from this tournament thanks to the ban list. This is a deck that is a little bit confused in terms of what its top end is going to be game to game, but it's going to be something, and that something is going to be powerful, whether that be multiple Sholau procs, multiple Mother Ascani procs onto Sholau or onto Sasquatch. The output here is pretty massive and very compelling. This is a list that otherwise would be mostly mopped up by things playing Gambit and maybe outpowered by things playing Captain Carter. So I do think we are seeing that this list is a playable, reasonable thing to bring to a tournament that I actually like some of the benefits of the ban list in this selection. Of course, sometimes people look at ban lists as a thing to circumvent. Andre Var, who won the most recent KMBest block party, the second one, decided to try to circumvent this ban list by simply playing V-Hand anyway. Now, I'm actually pretty suspicious of this. I know he's a very good player, but I do think there's something to be said for the idea that without Gambit, V-Hand just isn't the same level of power output. I really think that Gambit is covering up a lot of Victoria Hand's weaknesses, and especially if you're playing it in a more straightforward, stripped down shell, I'm just not sure this list is going to be able to do what it needs to do. That is a 3/5 that is a ton of power that you have access to that you are no longer really getting access to. You're doing things like Gladiator, Moon Girl, Quinjet. Where's the power coming from here? How much are we just trying to duplicate other Gambit? I have some suspicion that there's going to be a lot of Gambit and Prey in a deck like this, but it's not going to be the good Gambit and Prey. It's going to be the bad Gambit and Prey. He's a really good player, so I wouldn't be surprised to see this go farther, but when I look at this, I see a total victory for the ban list. Pixie Chef has rocked up with a Pixie deck that I honestly think is in a much better position, having to not deal with cards like Captain Carter and Iska. This is a list that is built to do a set amount of power output, and one of the problems with being a deck that does a set amount of power output with no interaction is that if you're not interacting with them, the Captain Carter deck will very often just simply go over the top of what you're doing. They'll get 50-something in one lane and 90-something in another, and it really sucks when all you have is maximum 40. They're really able to play around that. But without a deck going that tall in this metagame, there is a real chance for something else to define itself as the deck that sets the ceiling. And I think that's what makes this deck a much more attractive choice in this tournament than it is on ladder. A bunch of high-level players came to the roughly similar conclusion of we should be playing Batroc in a world where these are the bans and these are the requirements in this tournament. But I also think it's worth pointing out that Batroc has a bunch of different ways that you can build it. So here is the much more traditional one from Iris, compare and contrast to the one that Gamer and Browday brought. This is a list that is just very straightforward. Here is some power. Here is a small amount of tech. I have interaction in the form of Think First Steps, Juggernaut, and Mobius and Mobius. I have a bunch of power because I am a move deck that plays Sam Wilson, Craven, Batroc, Spider-Man, Silk, and Hydra Stomper. Wow, never seen that one before. And then just the cheapest and most relevant game-to-game interaction, Cosmo, Mobius, Juggernaut, Think First Steps. Seems pretty straightforward to me, and I think is probably the default build of this archetype. What's interesting is I think Sizer analyzed this metagame and thought, oh, okay, so what I need to do to win these mirrors is just have more beef. And that's sort of what it looks like the ethos here is. If Sizer looked at this metagame and said, I'm going to play a bunch of Batroc mirrors, how do I win Batroc mirrors? One of the answers you can come up with is just playing cards that are actually using your energy more efficiently. Big guys that do big guy stuff. Cards like Hellion that is a 5/8 that allows you to reposition very well, and Galactus First Steps who can actually be that big. And I think that's a really solid way to try to approach this stuff. You noticed he actually named his deck Sizer Matters, which I think is in reference to this line of thought, but it might just be a cute little pun. Cougar and Jay Walla looked at this metagame as a chance to play Cerebro 3, which I think is a very solid, very powerful list for someone to try to play in this tournament. I think Cerebro 3 tends to shine when people aren't really focused on it in a meaningful way. It has a lot of powerful, useful ways to get a ton of power onto the board in surprising ways. Of all the Cerebro decks, it is the one that potentially has the most ability to do things like copy a Scarlet Witch with a Frigga to make a second copy of the Scarlet Witch. It ends up being the one that is the most immune to bad rolls on locations, although it is still a Cerebro deck. And of course, there is a Mother Ascani angle here, where Mother Ascani can hit either Quinjet or Bast to make them 3 power, or hit a Cerebro to get a second one. Both of them are extremely relevant and viable ways to play that card. It is a very powerful card, and I'm not surprised to see it, although I am surprised a little bit to see it in Cerebro 3. The ban on Iska was aimed at multiple men, which I think is an extremely powerful list that definitely gets hurt when it loses a third of the scalers it gets to play. Derek's attempt at fixing this is not actually adding another scaler in. We're still on just multiple man and Human Torch, but hopefully making it a little bit more forgiving to draw them late. Cards like Fan Fei and Stick can provide some additional boosts to late versions of those cards, which would make it much easier for you to have a more forgiving deck. When you have 3 scalers, you don't need this stuff nearly as much, but the loss of Iska is super meaningful. We need all of our things to be able to actually start scaling. So having these cards that you can put on the board and effectively bank the buff on for an additional turn at least is a pretty smart deck building choice from Derek. I do think that this is a list that's going to either benefit a lot from the Conquest setup or not benefit a lot. And what I mean by that is in a Conquest matchup, having a very clear snap condition of I drew multiple man is a blessing and a curse, and I'm interested to see how it ends up, but Derek is such a skilled player that I suspect it will end up in his favor. Can Need has become known in my Discord as the Spider-Man Noir guy. He's currently top 10, and this has been his pet deck for an extended period of time. This is a labor of love, I think, and also a labor of thank God Captain Carter is banned, I would guess. This is a deck that is much more in line with what I would describe as the small surfer archetype that we've talked about a couple times on this channel, that is much more able to play from hand and do things from hand than being a board-based combo deck the way that the Captain Carter combo decks are. This is a list that is doing most of its points on turn 6, and is not showing you where those points are going to come from. You have a very unclear idea of what the output is going to be and where the output is going to be located. That is powerful, and it is a relevant and interesting way to try to build a Silver Surfer deck in the modern era. Now, there are some downsides here, but I do think that going 2-3-3 Spider-Man Noir is a very strong way to play this kind of deck as a sort of backup, or maybe Sarah is the backup Spider-Man Noir, but in my head, I think it's more the other way. Last up from ELA is a list that's just saying, let's play some generic tech. What if we had just some good points, Red Guardian, Cosmic Ghost Rider, and we'll figure it out from there? That's what ELA is trying to do here, and I think it is a very reasonable supposition going into a metagame that is deeply unknown, to just have broad answers if you're going to play answers rather than specific ones. We talked about the specific answers when we talked about the first deck, the Browday Gamer deck. That's really interesting because they picked two extremely specific answers. Hard call out, we want to beat Phantom X and Magic. Here, the answers are very, very generic. Red Guardian and Cosmic Ghost Rider are the kind of things that just hit a bunch of stuff. And I'm interested to see which approach bears more fruit, because this deck is definitely more able to accommodate that stuff because it is more forgiving of its own, I guess, foibles might be the right way to say it. Thanos gets to play a 5-drop as its tech card, but the Gamer deck really doesn't have that option. And I think that there is something to be said about having just a much cleaner, more powerful points package, but I am interested to see how this generic tech approach tends to shake out. All right, y'all. Thank you so much for watching. Remember, make sure you check out my tournament. It should be live as you see this on the day on my Twitch channel. There's drops going on. Make sure you get your drops as well. Come watch my tournament. Get free drops. Great value pitch. Thank you so much for watching. I've been KMBest. You've been phenomenal, and I'll see you in the next one.